Hey friends, it's Reverend Katie here. I'm so thankful to join you again in this midweek devotional space that we've created for our community. And I'm in my house right now. I've been, like many of you, sheltering in place, working remotely from home, and waiting for Hurricane Laura to arrive. We were spared a direct hit with Tropical Storm Marco, and I know you join me in being deeply thankful for that, for our city. But I also find my heart deeply heavy too for those friends and strangers to the west of us that are, many of them are under mandatory evacuation, leaving their homes, sometimes leaving their pets, leaving much of their belongings, not knowing in the next few days what they will come back to. And so I would just ask that you would be in constant prayer for our neighbors to the west of us. And I pray too that Hurricane Laura will diminish in its impact and that lives will be spared. And so today I'm just mindful of the fact that so many of us in this season have been required to make lots of decisions and lots of decisions quickly about things we care about, people that we care about. And perhaps it has created some tiredness in our spirit. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself. Even the strongest ones of us can experience this decision fatigue. And I mentioned in my sermon on Sunday, I think a statement that went something like this, that in times of crisis, we often don't experience change. It is actually the person that we already are that is revealed. And I think that's certainly the case this time and in every time when we're faced with these kinds of questions, dilemmas, and concerns. So today I want to talk a little bit about our core values that we each individually hold as people of faith. I want to talk about ethics that we have as Christians and talk a little bit in a way about that decision fatigue that is just a natural part of the human condition. So we are often tempted, I believe, even from the youngest days that we experience well into adulthood, we are often tempted to assume that there are simply good decisions and bad decisions. And often when you're faced with a dilemma, when you have a question that you're dealing with and you have to make a choice, search yourself and think back on some of the big decisions that you made in your life. Often the narrative is, I have to have the right facts, have access to the right people, and the right information to be able to make the one right choice. And if I don't make this one right choice, then everything, the house of cards that I've built, is just gonna fall away. Now, you might say, oh, that's not me, but come on, every single one of us, probably at some age or stage or point of our life, found ourselves putting that undue pressure on a decision that we had to make. And that's really characteristic of kind of that black and white thinking that we often have as kids. Kohlberg and Piaget did a lot of work talking about morals and ethics and the development of character of young people into adulthood. And they say that it's certainly right. We learn in the very beginning of life this black and white thinking to help us understand what morals are and aren't. And yet, when we move into adulthood, there's a little bit more complexity that's brought in the mix. That sometimes morals are not just one right decision, but it could be many right decisions that are made. Instead of right versus wrong, there are some situations in our lives that we have to decide and discern about where it could be right versus right. The good versus good, or sometimes the good versus perhaps the better. But there are moments where we can't make a wrong decision. We just have to make our decision. So let's just talk about, right now, people are having to ask themselves the question, will they honor this evacuation? So I've talked to a lot of folks over the years, whether it be the evacuation Katrina and Rita to 15 years later today with the storm Laura. There are a number of people asking the question, okay, I could evacuate and make sure that my family is safe and my dog is safe and that we are out of harm's way. But then there are also some questions that come up to say, but I love my city. I love my neighborhood. I want to be there to be able to help in the recovery and the aftermath to mitigate as much damage as we possibly can and not leave a city or a community or a town or a neighborhood that I love to fend for themselves. Good luck. Both of those stances have good intentions behind them. Both of them have deep Christian morals and ethics of care and tending and stewarding the people that have been given to us to make sure that their best health and life is tended and maintained. So, we have other decisions that are kind of unique to this time. Parents, again, I've talked about this again and again, but I think it is still something that is right at the very forefront of our community's question. Parents all over that are having to ask themselves, will I put my kid in school in person for their own social and emotional health and to help them continue to develop vital connections in human relationships? Or will I honor their bodily and physical health primarily and put them strictly in virtual school for the year? Seemingly impossible choices, but in their way, both very good choices. Again, it's not a question of the good or the bad. It is a question of right versus right, and ultimately the decision that is right for you. So, stepping away from the bigger questions that are unique to this very rare time that we're experiencing together, there are everyday concerns that you and I face, whether it's whether we should get a dog or should let our kids drive or all sorts of different things. What we should do with our finances and with our investments, how much should we give and how much should we keep for retirement? I mean, a myriad of things that any of us could name. And one thing, as I've been dealing with this, both as a pastor, but as a parent and as a spouse, and just as another person trying to make my own way in the world, making the best decisions that I can with the resources that I've been given to tend in life. There's a book by Rushmore Kidder called How Good People Make Tough Choices. How good people make tough choices. And it's just been really instructive to me on all these levels to both validate the conflict that I've experienced in different decisions that I've had to make, and to also, if you will, let go of the pressure that sometimes we unduly put on ourselves to say there's this one thing that I'm just missing. If only I could get the access to the answer out there, then I'd be okay and all would be well. And I think one of the most important pieces that Kidder talks about is, again, this as we move through our growth as children to adults through these notable stages of understanding what morality is, from black and white to more mature complexity that we can identify. He talks about the fact that every single choice that we make, if we really drill down to the operative principles, to the core values, to the things that are driving us in the choices we make, every single dilemma can be, I think, characterized in 4 different ways of describing them. And I just want to put these out there and see what you think. He says, first, one dilemma that many of our choices can point to is justice versus mercy. Another one can be the short term versus the long term. Another can be the individual, us, or you and me, versus community, others. And then truth, a commitment to truth versus a commitment to loyalty. So let's break these down a little bit. Justice versus mercy. Justice, this sense of fairness and equity and even-handedness, not having regard to specific people or situations, no matter how how extraordinary these people or situations may be. There's an even-handed application of the law, whatever the law would be, in conflicts, versus mercy that takes into account the human element, compassion, empathy, and love. Kidder tells a story, and one that I've heard from different folks in one way or another, where there's a couple that is very much with child, and they find themselves needing to get to the hospital immediately because that baby is coming. And so the wife and the husband get in the car, and of course, as probably any of us would do, they were speeding down the road, not having any regard for the limits that were in place, just trying to make sure that they could have a place to have their child come into the world safely in a doctor's hands and not their own. And so, of course, as the story goes, you would find a cop that's strategically placed right on a corner that they're passing, and this cop puts on his sirens and stops them and takes his sweet time to be able to process their license plate and finally come up to them, and they explain their situation. The cop rightly brings them to a hospital, but still the question remains whether that policeman should give them a ticket, even as they have had their baby and they're doing well. Should he give that couple a ticket because they did break the law? And if we all broke the law for all the things that we deemed were important, then, where would we be, right? So there's this whole tension between justice and mercy. Let's take the short term versus the long term. You've got now versus then is another way that you can talk about it. And it reflects the difficulties arising between the immediate needs, kind of the tyranny of the urgent, versus the way that those desires run counter to future goals or prospects. So one of the examples I think of is a young woman that we had living with us this summer as kind of an au pair babysitter to help us kind of get acclimated back to Baton Rouge. She went to school out of state and was at a Ivy League school, very well regarded, and had gone there partly because of the experience of the classroom that had just been so famous to form people in political science and all of that. So facing a virtual prospect for the year, she wondered whether she might delay her education or defer for a year so that she might have that real experience in class rather than forfeit that just to get a degree. So again, the degree, getting it on time, working on the timeline that was originally set, that could be a great short-term goal that has all sorts of different reasons why it would be the perfect thing to do, disregarding a COVID-19 reality. But then what does it forfeit with the connections that one might make in class with professors and with internships that she could have had because of that in-classroom experience? There's a lot that would be lost, even as she would have been kind of pushing through. That's another example, and I'm sure you and I could come up with many. Individual and community, us versus them, or self versus others, the smaller group versus the larger group. There's all sorts of ways that this plays out. And we experience this a lot in organizations. I can, of course, speak to particularly the church, that when we have the needs of the membership per se, those needs of the membership and the finite amount of time that we have and the finite resources that we have, sometimes there is a deep pull to serve the membership's needs rather than maybe the needs that are an expressed value of serving the community, giving toward that which is outside of our own interests. And again, this goes to core values that are either lived or maybe aspirational or expressed, but we find that when you look at the way that an organization or a membership particularly spends their financial resources or uses their time, you can usually tell which value of community or the individual is operative there. Again, that's just something that we constantly are called to think about. And then truth versus loyalty. Truth, honesty, candor, and integrity versus commitment, responsibility, or promise keeping. You can see truth to most people is conformity and transparency with facts or with what's real. And then loyalty often involves allegiance to a person, government, or set of ideas to which one owes fidelity. I see this happen a lot in the lives of pastors like myself or counselors. So, for instance, we have a loyalty to our profession or the commitment that we've made to confidentiality, to hold that above all things so that others can trust us and come to us with anything as a safe place. But then there are some times when we find ourselves in a situation listening to a congregation member or to a client, and you know something about this person's situation that you just, you feel like you have to tell them either for their own best good or for their safety. And there is this real tension that can come in trying to honor a multiplicity of good commitments to make between profession and person and all of that. So I wanted to just walk that out so you can see what that looks like. And many people, I believe, would experience freedom if we would stop becoming so paralyzed by trying to make that one right decision, just like we might have believed when we were young that we have this one right person in the world, and if only that we would find them in that one place, then our life would be good. But instead, we have to make the best out of multiple potential good decisions and be guided by the right influences in our lives to get to that very place. So this requires less knowledge of that answer that seems reachable over there, but instead it is reachable within, in here. And this is, I guess, as we close, this is what I want to say to those of us that call on the name of God and are believers and followers in Christ Jesus, that if we would begin again, reaching within ourselves to the imago Dei, to the image of God that is always available to us as a guide in all things. This can be the way of wisdom that will help us see as clearly as we can what the right choice may be. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to be starting a series called The Way of Wisdom, and we're going to be walking through Proverbs, these kind of freeze-dried nuggets of wisdom that help us to see the invitation of God throughout generation to generation and even in this time. And Proverbs 3, 5 through 6, it's a simple verse, but if we really dig into what the writer is meaning, we can see that it speaks, I hope, to you and me today in whatever place we stand. Proverbs 3, 5 through 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and do not lean upon your own understanding, your own ego, your own way. But in all your ways acknowledge God, and God will make your paths straight, will make your paths clear." So how would our lives and our decision-making change if we truly believed that? If we believed that if we reached into what was within us, that we had everything within us that we possibly needed to make the very best choice for ourselves and for the people that we care about in this very moment, if we believed that, how would our decision-making change as our own lives and with the body of people that we are charged to tend? Wonder for you, what kind of dilemma are you experiencing right now? Just take a breath, take a minute, and take stock of maybe everything that's before you in work, in your family, something that may seem small, but it's the 3 a.m. agenda that's kind of keeping you up at night. I know for me, it's having to come to peace with, over the past couple of weeks, having to put a parent in a nursing home, right? So I had this dilemma between, I guess you would call it probably, oh gosh, I don't know what it would be. Yeah, it's one of those situations where it's kind of a multiplicity of things. It's short-term goals versus long-term goals. It's truth versus loyalty. I experience a loyalty to want to give my mom, in fact, a life that is as comfortable as possible at home. But the truth is, ultimately, that she came to a place where she couldn't care for herself and she couldn't have others without proper training care for her either. And so I'm dealing with it just like you are. And there may be something in your life that is the thing that continues to be the tension in your own heart. So I want you to pay attention this week to those core values that might be operating within you with that situation. Is it justice? Is it short-term needs? Is it the needs of the self that are real and setting healthy boundaries and doing good things for your own life and your own love and your own family is very important. Is it truth? Is it mercy? Is it future goals, community, or loyalty? What is that which is driving you? All moral drivers that bring about character in their own way. Pay attention to the way those show up in your life today. My prayer for you is that you really will connect once again to the source, so that you will allow God to freely direct your paths in the way that you and I are all called to go, in the multiplicity of good choices that we have the opportunity to make. May we model today a connection to God and a trust fully that we are embraced and held in God's almighty hand, no matter what comes. Be well, friends. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon.